Okay, so we are continuing. This is our first roundtable, and I'm just here to pass the mic over to Eugenia Morales Viana, who will be moderating this panel and who is the first year PhD student in anthropology program. We are very happy to have her here.
Thank you. Thank you for all who stayed and continue to listen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present in order of presentation. So I'll present the speaker and then they'll do the presentation and the next one. Okay, that's okay with you. Okay, so we're going to start right away with John Gibler. John Gibler is an investigative journalist based in Mexico. He is the author of several books, including To Die in Mexico, Dispatches from Inside the Drug War, and I Couldn't Even Imagine That They Would Kill Us, an oral history of the attacks against students of Ayotzinapa, which was chosen as a best book of the year by Publishers Weekly. His work on mass disappearance of students in Ayotzinapa has been published in California Sunday Magazine, featured on NPR's All Things Considered, and praised by The New Yorker. So please take it away, John.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks to Eva for the invitation and for bringing us all together. And also thanks to Maggie for all the excellent work with coordinating the event. So I've changed my mind 3 times in the last 5 minutes about what I'm going to say. And I'll apologize in advance for the chaos. I first came in contact with forced disappearance as a journalist in 2006 when I was reporting in Guerrero on the Zapatista Other campaign. And I was handed an unpublished photocopy of a written testimony by an indigenous member of the Popular Revolutionary Army, Andrés Sompaxle Tecpile, who had been disappeared by military intelligence agents in 1996, tortured for 4 months, and miraculously escaped from a military base in the state of Mexico where he was being held at the time and returned to clandestinity. It took me about 6 years to be able to get into contact with him, and I began to interview him in 2011. I interviewed him for 2 years and then published a book based on his story. At the time, as you know, Marcela gave this amazing kind of high view of the macro situation of the transformation of political violence in Mexico in the second half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. Those years of reporting in Mexico for me, I arrived as a freelance journalist in 2006. I'd worked in Mexico in 99-2000 as a volunteer for human rights organization. So I had a tiny point of contact at the very end of the pre-regime, and then really started as a reporter in 2006, the full year before the declaration of the so-called war on drugs, which 2006 was a year of social movements, was a year of incredible expressions of the famous at the time Mexican creativity of protest. I would define, an outsider who was there at the time, but I would define almost the image of the year of 2006 was a march, was a mobilization, was people in the street, was a fist in the air. This was the other campaign of the Zapatistas. This was the Atenco mobilization and then also repression on May 4th in 2006. This was the Oaxaca teachers' strike that exploded into the first unarmed insurrection in Latin America of the 21st century. This was a year of mining strikes, of course, the allegations of electoral fraud against the then candidate Andrés Manuel López Obrador and the mass mobilizations in Mexico City. By the end of that year, December, the highly questioned President Felipe Calderón declared this so-called war on drugs in his home state, Michoacán, which was a state then governed by the opposition PRD party locally, sent the military into the streets and unleashed a nightmare, or the transformation of a nightmare, into what we're still living through today. And in the course of his 6-year administration, that image of Mexico in the street, people organizing and mobilized, in protest and social movements, that defining image had been completely replaced with, as Marcela spoke about and you guys talked about in the conversation, with the image of the displays of murdered, theatrically, cruelly dismembered and displayed bodies. Bodies hung from bridges, bodies mutilated, heads posted on fence posts and so forth. The full arc of transformation, I think, from social movements and organizing to the brutal display of violence on human bodies. And it was really during the last half of that, as we saw in Marcela's amazing maps, that the forced disappearances start to pop up again. It was thought that this is something that, and even still in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was so little information about the years of counterinsurgency repression in Mexico. It was so difficult. I remember asking an amazing friend and human rights activist, Rafael Alvarez, where I could read more about El Partido de los Pobres, the Party of the Poor, and Lucio Cabañas, and he told me to read a novel. It was an excellent novel by Carlos Montemayor, Guerra en el Paraíso, but there was nothing really in print, nonfiction, about that incredibly important movement at the time. Laura Castellanos published an excellent book a few years later, Fritz Glockner, and a whole bunch of other people. But it was so difficult to find historical, sociological, anthropological works about that time and those movements. And it was thought, in what little acknowledgement there was of them, that violence was fully encapsulated in the past. It had a beginning, it had a middle, and it had an end. That end, scholars might debate sometime in the 1980s. But the official discourse is definitely by the 1990s, that didn't happen anymore. And hence, Andrés Sompaxle Tecpile's experience for me was central to show that, of course, it still happened. And here's someone who it happened to, and who had lived to tell the story, and he could talk about it in ways that are extremely important, I think, just in a human sense, but also important politically and legally for understanding the operations of forced disappearance. Rarely do people leave from the state of being forcibly disappeared, emerge from it, or escape from it. And so his testimony described, of course, the torture techniques, the relations between different offices of the government. He was moved from police stations to clandestine security houses to military bases. He was, of course, moved by state agents using unmarked state, official vehicles. He was transported on the highway system. So there's all kinds of indications of the infrastructure of forced disappearance that still was in play and operating in the mid-1990s. And I thought, as I was interviewing him, of course, we were starting to see these first stories of the arrest of El Pozolero, which Marcela wrote about, which gave us this shocking window into they're dissolving people's bodies in acid, right? Then we see, the early reports of the clandestine mass graves, obviously in Tamaulipas. Marcela's very first, was one of the most, for me, impactful magazine articles of that time, Marcela going to Matamoros and approaching people in line at the morgue to interview them. And this woman who would come up and haunt her for years by saying, "Journalists, why are you even here? We've been screaming about this for some time and no one listened to us." It was as if we were speaking from beneath the sea. Marcela's haunting by that statement actually carried her through 10 years of investigation to publish the book that we were talking about earlier. It's an absolutely amazing work of journalism. So these stories were just starting to emerge in that period of the end of the last few, and we saw it on the map, right? 2009, the dots start to appear more, 2010, 2011. By 2012, the map is already beginning to be covered and just getting more and more full. And those were the years that I was interviewing Sompaxle and thinking about how urgent, terribly urgent, this wasn't now so much of a historical investigation about forms of state repression, but this was this terrifying window into our present and potentially our future, as the practice of state forced disappearance had morphed into a technology of control and accumulation in state, private, illegal, kind of fused conglomerates of depredation and horror. I'm trying to find different words, right? A different language for talking about drug traffickers or organized crime. This is this full fusion of state and non-state actors in mercantile operations where one of the essential pieces of merchandise is human pain, is terror, human lives. And the Zetas, I think, were one of the great innovators of this merger and this technology, and precisely that whole Gulf region that we see in Tamaulipas and Veracruz is just this explosion. I think a part of it was the systematic preying of Central American migrants on their way through Mexico to the United States. I remember Oscar Martinez, the great Salvadoran reporter, writing about this in the mid-2000s. I can still remember seeing a story of his in Gato Pardo and thinking for a second that I was hallucinating, or that I couldn't actually be reading what I was reading, because he was talking about, the mass forced disappearance of migrants in Sonora, in a region where I had been. I'd arrived there a couple of weeks after it happened, and I'd heard the stories, and I felt like I'd been thrown into Pedro Páramo, right? I couldn't figure out what was happening, what could be true, what could be fact. And then there it was, documented in Oscar's story. All of this is before, for me, before an event that would crack my heart open and alter my life. And I think, in so much more devastating ways, other people's, which was Ayotzinapa, the night of September 26, 27, 2014, which led to two hugely kind of transformative things, I think, for Mexico. The valor, right? The work and the love of the families and of the classmates of those students, and going to the street and blocking highways and setting the state Congress on fire and torching the municipal palace in Iguala, in marching to Mexico City and not accepting the lies and the early attempts to minimize what was happening. That all led to the creation of an explosion of social outrage across Mexico, which put the Mexican government briefly in checkmate. And in a moment of weakness in 2014, in November, they decided to allow, as Marcela mentioned, a group of international experts into the country and give them official full access to the government's investigation to help them along. And this would enable us, together with essentially the families, but then also independent journalists, and the HIE, the EAF, the Argentine team of forensics anthropology. This confluence of factors would create what I think is probably the most exhaustive documentation of a state crime in recent history, and definitely in Mexican history. There is so much documentation about who did exactly what that night that it's mind-boggling that almost no one is in jail. And what this revealed to us was what I think of as the merger, the exhaustive documentation of exactly what happened that night, and then how the state kicked into gear to cover it all up. Which is another way of thinking about an administrative stage of forced disappearance, making sure it's impossible to actually find the students and find the truth. That revealed this absolute merger of all factors of local and transnational organized crime, the security apparatus of the state on the local, regional, and federal level, including the military, principally the military, and the justice system itself. This is why I start thinking about this conglomeration, right, of depredation and horror. And then that's on the one side. On the other side, or a second factor that was hugely, overwhelmingly important, was the formation of a group called The Other Disappeared. The name itself should make everyone weep, or did me. Los Otros Desaparecidos, right? A group that came together when they saw the bodies pulled from mass graves and the fact that none of those 28 bodies initially belonged to the students. They said, okay, well now Mario and Mayra in Huitzuco, who had been looking for their brother Tomas for 2 years, said, now we know where to look. We have to dig. And so they started organizing. They met at a church. I was there with Marcela. She was the one who first heard about it. As always, the best olfato periodístico que hay. And she's like, we have to go to this church. Like, why are we going to a church? She's like, all these family members are going to meet us. Like, let's go to the church. And that's where they started to come together and organize to go out in commissions to look for more hidden grave sites. And initially the government tried to get in their way and accuse them of all kinds of crimes for tampering with crime scenes, even though the whole concept of a crime scene for the government is this foreign language because, of course, they don't process anything, they don't investigate anything. And the existence of this organization forced them awkwardly, clumsily to have to pretend to show up and register evidence and collect human remains and make this initial pantomime of investigation. And they were immediately devastatingly successful. They were finding hundreds of these graves within weeks and months. It became so successful, folks in Mexico City invited them to start giving workshops in Mexico City. Mothers and other family members have disappeared from states across the country, traveled to these workshops. I interviewed one of these mothers, a woman named Araceli Salcedo Jimenez, who was looking for her daughter, Fernanda Rubí, disappeared in Orizaba in 2012. And she told me about going with two of her collective members, also mothers of disappeared children, weeping nonstop that whole night after the first day of the workshop because they'd been seeing Mario show photographs of the drums they used to dissolve bodies in diesel and of the first graves and the bones they were pulling out. And they said, I don't want to find my daughter that way, And then they wept, and some women from Sinaloa tried to console them. And then after a night of insomnia, they decided, this is what we have to do now. We have to start digging too. And they, like hundreds of collectives across the country, would start looking underground. There were collectives, for example, Javier Valdez wrote about Las Rastreadoras in Sinaloa before Ayotzinapa, but really as a mass social phenomenon. I think it was Ayotzinapa and then the other disappeared, which led to this turn to looking for loved ones underground, which would then put the nation and the government in a kind of legitimacy checkmate. I think it's telling that López Obrador had almost an initial dislike and very disgruntled experience with the family members of the disappeared, because once again, they showed that this merger that was revealed by the exhaustive documentation of Ayotzinapa, if you looked closely enough, if you grabbed your magnifying glass and walked up to a situation in Veracruz or Tamaulipas or Sinaloa or Oaxaca or Tijuana, you were going to find a very similar situation. That map showing you that it's across the country. And that's why I think the López Obrador government had this intense aversion, both to Ayotzinapa, which is a whole another can of worms, and to the collectives, the family members. I wanted to talk briefly about, and I might have already messed that up. Did I already go over time?
A little bit.
Okay, I already went over time. So I knew this was going to happen. The actual title of the talk, which is about case files, I'll see you at the coffee station. That's the thing about the case files. I have a whole analysis about it, but thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. We're going to move on with Alejandra Guillén, and I think you have a presentation now, so you can. So Alejandra Guillén is a Mexican journalist and research professor at Instituto Tecnológico y de Estudios Superiores de Occidente in Guadalajara, Jalisco. She is co-founder of the project ¿A dónde van los desaparecidos? Where do the disappeared go? And co-author with Marcela Turati and Mau Torres of an investigation, The Country of 2,000 Graves. So please welcome Alejandra.
No, better here. Because I need to read because I speak very bad my English, and I will read some things and then I will improvise, and if I talk in Spanish, you traduce in your Google. Please. Well, the problem is how to explain in some minutes, but I will tell you first that what's happening in the region where I live, at the western region of Mexico, particularly at Jalisco. This is the roundabout of the disappeared people at Guadalajara, but this has maybe 10 or 12, maybe 12 years that the collectives of families they named this roundabout that where the name was the Niños Héroes, and now is the symbolic place, same at the Ciudad de Mexico. And in that place, we have now the city, the state with more disappeared at Mexico, and a lot of problems are being in that place. You maybe knew about the Mencho cartel, Jalisco Nueva Generación was killed, and maybe you also knew about the Rancho Izaguirre, and the Recruitment disappeared. Has maybe more than 10 years at that region. And that's why I'm going to talk about that, because when we did a work with Marcela also a lot of years ago, and she presented the graves in the country, we were worried about all the disappeared people that were alive, or maybe they are not alive, but they were disappeared for another objective, that was to make them hit them, or to make slavers on the slave labor. Thank you. I told her that I needed her. Well, and Sibely is going to explain the Cartel Guadalajara, that is the first cartel formally at Mexico, and the Operación Condor, and all the history that is needed to explain the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, that my partners have said it's not about a cartel. We don't need to think about the traffic drugs situation. It's about capitalism accumulation, or accumulation, a new economy, a new order, a new thing, that it's not an improvised situation. And that's the thing that we can't still answer what's happening. And the reinforcement show us that since the beginning of this cartel, maybe 2012, maybe, there was a strategy, and it's not an improvised group. The Rancho Izaguirre was found in the last year, as you know, but what show us this situation, all these clothes are from people that were looking for a job, and they arrived. Maybe Rancho Izaguirre is not the first place they arrived. There are a lot of places. There is a network in all the territory. And the problem is that they found this rancho, but we don't know where is the people, and we don't know still where in other places, in other states. And maybe not everybody is dead, but some of them maybe were killed, and some of them are like slaves in some other territories, like a colonialism strategy in Sinaloa, Chiapas, and the places that they want to control. Here we can see this collective. This collective went maybe in December, in January, before Guerreros Buscadores, and this is the region, Valles region, Tequila region. All of this territory has been previously devastated for the agave to do tequila. Devastated. When you see this first, then is the people. It's something, they control everything. And the tequila economy is also surely in this situation. And that's the thing these things, they practice with gotcha, and maybe that's the Santa Muerte, some things that the collectives find in the place. Those young people are they were found when Guardia Nacional went first to Rancho Izaguirre, and they are in jail, and they are the only people that is in jail. Well, the alcalde of Teuchitlan. But the problem, I think, is that we don't see the real beneficiaries of all this strategy. We are always talking about the victims and the people that is down of this group and the people that is putting the life and everything. And the real beneficiaries, they are not all of them from Mexico. We know, of course, that we don't see the American, the Asia, this is an international mafia. And I think that's the big problem, that we cannot see who is getting money and who is getting rich and who is having a good life in another country. And all of this strategy that I think is the heart of the problem. And also, for example, with Rancho Izaguirre, the last year, a lot of journalists from other countries asked me if Trump has to send militaries and all of that things. That's the problem, no? The other side of what Marcela said, for one side, in the country, they tell you that you want to attack the government, but Trump also don't assume the responsibility of sending arms and all of these people that we don't see. And this group, well, they surely, if you see, they are young people. They were at Rancho Izaguirre, but we don't really know if they arrive in the same way looking for a work and then they incorporated to this group. We don't know really who are them. And Rancho Izaguirre really show us a situation that has more than 10 years in Guadalajara. Maybe since 2040, maybe 12 years. But those are the places that we know that we have documents. In Lagos de Moreno, that is more like in another place of Jalisco. Tala, that is the same region that Teuchitlan. And Puerto Vallarta, that is the place that maybe some of you know. It's the touristic place. And Teuchitlan in the last year. But there are a lot of places in that decade they could consolidate. What do they do with all the people that survives the training, that survives all the cruel situation that I'm going to explain if I have time? If I don't have time, I can go also to the coffee time with... But some journalists from El Universal, they got these papers in the rancho where was the Menchos Capo. And they were very, 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 I don't know how to describe, but it's very important because the works that are offered since 10 years ago, the money that they offer them, it's like 300 pesos. How many dollars per week? $20, I don't know. And if you see, well, there are a lot of papers if you look at the El Universal, but you can see grupos de choque. That's why they use the people that is looking for a work. And if they survive all the training, they are used maybe to send them to Chiapas or to another country, depends what they need to control. And in the Grupo de Choque, they also, in the nomina, I don't know how to say nomina, they still earn 3,000 or 4,000 a week. It's very, very, they don't decide how much to earn. That's why I say some of them are like slaveries, because also if they try to escape, they surely will not live. And if they can go, the family maybe is killed. it's very, very difficult situation. It's a control of all the situation, but they put like muchachos de choque, halcones, policías from the municipalities. There is another one about the cut hairs because they are like military. They cannot allow to be like the hair like Sibely, for example. They have to be like militaries. And well, there's a lot of things that is very important that they founded. And also, El Sapo is the ones that he is the one that goes and kills the people that is not going to survive and that they don't function to this work. Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, and also in this paper that they found the journalist, if you see, here's the Sapo. There is a lot of testimonies that from the people that survived that say that he goes personally in the moment of the killing people. Here is a map. Maybe if the Pacific is here, Puerto Vallarta is like there, more like that. But there are more mountains since Tala to Puerto Vallarta. He controls all that region, well, everything, but the Sapo region is that. And for example, the first camp we found is more like this. And they have security houses here, 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 here. And that's what we know. And the last year we found Rancho Izaguirre, and if you see, it's the same region. And more of the young people arrives to Central de Autobuses if they are not from Guadalajara. That's the Tlaquepaque Central, and there's another like where you see Bosque La Primavera, like more on the north. Another arrives to Zapopan Central, and then they are translated to maybe first to a security house, and then they go to the mountains or the Rancho Izaguirre or La Presa La Vega acá. And there are a lot of places that we don't know. They were in jail. They are not more in jail. This is from Lagos de Moreno, 2016. They were cleaning wine childs. They were the first people that were taken for this work. And the only one, the Jessica and Joanna, they both have a lawyer, and they go out from jail because the Joanna was recruiter. This is Tala. This is the mountain. This is only a very short ministerial statement of one of the survivors of Tala. I will read this quickly. We turned towards Tala. We went into a gap and arrived at an abandoned farm with barbed wire. Well, he explained how he arrives to this place, but the point that I think is very important is when he says, I realized that I had crossed the line of not returning and that maybe something bad would happen. In fact, there was a strange smell. You could see the look of sadness and misery in the people. When he arrives, he was working like a teacher English, and then he was he lives first at Los Angeles, and then he got married at Guadalajara. He was a teacher English. He divorced, and then he was working for a new place where he could get more money because he needed now to send the money for the son and everything. And this guy was looking for a job, and he gives a lot of information. He also did a lot of things that he says I would never say because I had to do some worst, horrible things to survive. It's not a war about victims and perpetrators. I don't know how to say. It's another thing that we have to think in in some different way. But it's the moment when he describes this, it's the moment when he knows he's disappeared people, when he's like at Chupadero or someplace like this. That's very important in the testimony. I almost don't have money, time, and money also.
You can start wrapping up.
No money, no time. This is the place. This is the first place he arrived. He was studying with my brother. He was a student, and the school never did nothing. In the testimonies, he was killed. It's very difficult because the families that have the testimonies, they still are looking for the young, and for all of the people that were recognized, that were killed, son muy poquitos. The people has not the certain because they were, yes, they don't have the body because they use the fire. Let me see, that in that places they were incinerated. This is another place. If you see, ¿cómo se decía, Raúl? Pedazo de hueso. A piece of bones. Those are fragments of bones. In Tala, all of them arrived looking for a job. They are in jail, all of them. This is an audience. And here is one of them were like a survivor, and he's testifying. And they tell them, but if we arrive in the same way, why he's a victim and I am not a victim? Well, he explains a lot of things that I'm not going to profundize now, but it's very interesting in the law for the lawyers, because there is no way to do to reflection this in these causes. The majority of them were migrants, and they were day laborers, unemployed, car washers, bricklayers, loaders from the Mercado de Abastos, Mexicans deported from the United States, former police officers, former military personnel, young people with addiction problems, Central Americans. In that time, I think now it's more, there are more countries in this situation. There were also many men who were recruited in the area around the Agua Azul Park in the center of Guadalajara, in the town. And some of them were disappeared, and they were taken by the force. They were not looking for a job. There are a lot of ways to recruitment, but the most known is it's throughout works. And well, also, it is a place to construct new subjectivities, because you need to. There is not hitmen in the country. You have to build it. These photos are from the misa. I don't know how to say misa. Mass. All of them were disappeared in the region of Valles, maybe 12 years ago. There is a military training in the strategy. And what we see is that if you can do this, well, also this place is a place to the transformation of the soul, of the body, and epistemological transformation, the deshumanization, dissolution of persons from everybody, the language of cruelty in the body, because if you can do that, you can survive, and also the exhibition of cruelty between them before they go. I put this map again to remember the places. And to finish, we can see in the last year, or maybe in the two last years, that, for example, they arrived to Guadalajara Central, and they were founded without life in Sinaloa. Those boys, those young boys, they were 16, I think. They were founded at Sinaloa. And another one from Aguascalientes, they were founded like a criminals, but they had a disappearance report. And if you, there is they cannot back like a victims. If they back, they cannot back like a victims. They back in a worse place. If you come in these places, it's a bad thing. And for example, hits Grupos de Choque in Tuxtla, Chiapas. It's why I'm saying that they send them. And it's everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sí. And now we have Sibely Cañedo Cázares. Sibely is a journalist and researcher. She has worked in various media outlets in the state of Sinaloa as a reporter and editor. She specializes in the study of internal forced displacement caused by violence associated with organized crime, as well as other human rights issues. She holds a PhD in social sciences from the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, and she is currently a research professor at the Technological University of Escuinapa. She is the founder of the Collective of Journalists for Peace and Freedom of Expression. She is a project coordinator at Iniciativa Sinaloa, where she carries out advocacy work on the anti-corruption and human rights agenda. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here, and thank you very much for the invitation. It is an honor to share this space for reflection and dialogue on one of the most painful yet most urgent issues of our time. I'm going to talk about Sinaloa State. It's a piece of the puzzle, and I'm going to make some connections about what my colleagues have already told us. In Sinaloa and in much of Mexico, thousands of families live in a kind of limbo, suspended in time by suffering. They do not know whether their sons, daughters, or relatives are alive or dead. That suspended time has a name: enforced disappearance. Today, more than 130,000 people are officially registered as disappeared in Mexico. Behind every number, there is a family that continues searching. For this reason, this presentation begins from a basic conviction: this forced absence cannot be understood only as statistics or analytical categories. They are also a profound social experience of pain, one that has given rise to resistance and collective struggle. In this presentation, I will try to address three central questions. How did we arrive at this crisis? Why has the disappearance of persons become so widespread? And what structures allow it to continue with such levels of impunity? To explore these questions, I will focus on the state of Sinaloa as a case study. Although Sinaloa has long been associated with drug trafficking, today it faces a crisis of unprecedented proportions. The disappearance of persons has become a systematic practice within the dynamics of criminal violence. According to Mexico's National Registry, at least 6,784 people are currently missing in the state. But this practice did not emerge overnight. It has a history, and we can understand this history through three major stages. The first stage corresponds to what in Mexico is known as the Dirty War, which took place between the late 1960s and the 1980s. During this period, the Mexican state used enforced disappearance as a tool of political repression against dissident movements, guerrilla organizations, and student activists. Recent research estimates that at least 8,594 people were victims of serious human rights violations, including enforced disappearance. In Sinaloa, one of the earliest documented cases was that Lourdes Martinez Huerta, a professor at the School of Nursing, the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, and a member of the September 23 Communist League, a radical leftist organization. She was 3 months pregnant when she was disappeared in May 1975. She was never seen again. Her case would tragically mark the beginning of a long night. During those years in the city of Culiacán, mothers went to the offices of local newspapers to report the disappearance of their sons. This was also the time of Operation Condor, a major anti-drug campaign launched under pressure from the United States. The operation aimed not only to eradicate marijuana and poppy crops, it also involved counterinsurgency tactics against rural and student populations. The final report at Mexico's Truth Commission documented how members of the Mexican army carry out torture, forced displacement, extrajudicial execution, and enforced disappearances linked to arbitrary arrest. In this first stage, disappearance was fundamentally a state practice linked to counterinsurgency. Okay, we see on the slides about relatives and mothers who went to the local newspapers' offices to make a public appeal about the disappearances of their sons or their relatives, and that hasn't changed a lot. No? Okay. Decades later, this practice began to transform. Beginning in the 1980s, an important shift occurred. After Operation Condor, several drug trafficking leaders moved their operations outside Sinaloa. In this context, the Guadalajara cartel emerged, an organization that would later give rise to the Sinaloa cartel and other criminal groups. Violence began to take new forms. In Sinaloa, a term became popular that is now part of everyday language, levantón or levantones, like pick them up, a colloquial term referring to an illegal abductions carried out by criminal groups. This kind of abductions increasingly became associated with disputes between criminal groups, retaliatory violence, and new forms of labor exploitation within the illegal economy. One striking example occurred in 1984 with the discovery of Rancho El Búfalo in the state of Chihuahua. There, thousands of agricultural workers, many of them from Sinaloa, were found working under conditions close to slavery in massive marijuana plantations. Many had been deceived with promises of legitimate work. The press referred to them as los enganchados or the recruited. Similar practices soon appeared across the northern Mexico, including Sinaloa. Rural workers and peasants began to be used as forced labor within the illegal drug economy. In 1985, the Mexican army discovered 52 hectares of marijuana fields in irrigated land in the community of El Bledal, in the municipality of Nabolato, near the city of Culiacán. At least 65 people were detained there. Only 2 were guards, the rest were farm workers who had been promised good wages for harvesting tomatoes, most of them children and young people from working class neighborhoods. Once again, the promise of legitimate work had been a deception. This case became known locally as El Bufalito, suggesting the repetition of a pattern. At this point, short-term disappearances began to be associated to a criminal economy based in good part on forced labor. The third stage begins with the so-called war on drugs, launched in Mexico in 2006, as we heard before. This period marks a turning point. Violence intensified across the country due to the fragmentation of the major criminal cartels, and as a result, disappearances also began to increase dramatically. Today, we know that around 90% of all disappearances in Mexico have happened in the last 20 years. Sinaloa has followed the same pattern. Disappearances have increased during periods of internal conflict within criminal organizations, such as after the capture of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman between 2016 and 2017, and more recently during the internal conflict within the Sinaloa cartel that began in 2024. On the slide, we can see the statistics that how to increase in 2,000 seats, like a turning point. Between September of that year, 2024, and December 2025 alone, more than 2,000 people were reported to have disappeared in the state. This means that nearly 1/3 of the more than 6,500 cases recorded in Sinaloa happened in just 16 months of the current narco conflict. We can see how the arrest of major cartel leaders fragment the criminal organizations, and that leads to an increase in disappearances, murder, and forced displacement, among other crimes. We have had some crisis of balance in these stages, 2008 to 2012, 2015 to 2017, and the current narco conflict that as we are in this moment, 2024 to 2025. Despite this, the Office of the State Prosecutor in Sinaloa has opened only 1,016 investigations for this crime since 2013, and only 2.64% of these cases have been brought before a judge. These numbers reveal both the magnitude of impunity and the enormous gap between actual disappearances and those that are formally investigated. But beyond the statistics, the pattern itself is deeply troubling. Most of the victims are young men of working age. This suggests that many disappearances are linked to forced recruitment or to violent dynamics within criminal economies. Evidence of this can be seen in the rim discoveries of clandestine rapes and extermination sites across the country. One example is Gibler Ranch. We heard about that before, in the state of Jalisco. Forced recruitment, however, is not new. It has historical precedents, as we saw. If in the past people were recruited for agricultural drug production, today, after the rise of synthetic drugs, they are used in other roles within criminal warfare, surveillance, contract killings, or technological operations, among other activities. In other words, they are treated as exploitable human resources within this bloody and lethal system. At this stage, many disappearances are not committed directly by the state, others do, but rather by criminal groups. However, there is such a degree of omission and infiltration of state agencies by crime that the state's acquiescence in the mass disappearance of people seems evident. Right. In this context, disappearance serves several strategic functions for criminal organizations. First, it allows them to conceal homicides and reduce the statistical visibility of violence. Second, it facilitates territorial and social control. Disappearances not only eliminate bodies, it also produces fear and silence. To better understand these dynamics, I propose the concept of narco-capitalism. This system has diversified into a portfolio of illegal activities that includes extortion, financial laundering, and the illegal exploitation of natural resources. Drug trafficking is no longer a marginal criminal activity. It operates as a complex economic system that generates value, distributes labor, and accumulates capital on a global scale. At the base of this system is what we might call the narco-proletariat: peasants, farm workers, couriers, traffickers, and hitmen who occupy the lowest levels of the value chain. At the other end is an economic elite that benefits from the financial flows generated by these activities, business, financial, and political networks that facilitate the laundering and integration of these resources into the formal economy, often in countries of the global north, including the US. This division of labor reproduces deep inequalities within the criminal economy. It is sustained by protection and collaboration from actors within the states. In Mexico, the rise of organized crime and therefore the rise of mass disappearance cannot be understood without the collusion of authorities at multiple levels of government. While the most vulnerable sectors face direct violence, prison, death, or disappearance, the upper levels of the system often remain invisible and protected by networks of impunity. For this reason, it is crucial to understand that this tragedy is not only a criminal phenomenon. It is also the result of economic, political, and institutional structures that allow it to persist. In the absence of the state, it has been the families who have taken on the responsibility of searching for their loved ones. Their struggle has become one of the most important human rights movements in contemporary Mexico. In Sinaloa, search collectives and families have discovered thousands of clandestine graves. Very often it's their mothers, known as searching mothers, who carry out the work that the state should be doing. In Mexico, impunity is nearly total. In its most recent report, the United Nations described enforced disappearance as the perfect crime, since between 98 and 99% of cases never lead to a conviction. For those who commit these crimes, the probability of facing legal consequences is therefore almost zero. At the same time, the victims face a system of selective justice and opacity. When cases are considered politically or economically important, authorities mobilize what they call full force of the state. Yet thousands of other disappearances remain ignored. A recent example illustrates this disparity. The federal government launched an unprecedented operation to search for 10 miners from a Canadian company who had been abducted by an armed group in the municipality of Concordia in southern Sinaloa. Almost 1,200 members of the armed forces were deployed in the search, something rarely seen in cases involving other missing persons in the state, even though many families had been searching for years or decades. The operation had led to the discovery of clandestine graves, where sadly 7 of the mine workers were found dead. Yet these were graves that local search collectives have already reported more than a year earlier without being heard. Now those same families are being denied information and even the right to participate as observers in the search process. As a conclusion, we can say that impunity in Mexico is not only systemic, it is also historical. Over time, this accumulated impunity has become a mechanism that normalizes institutional failure within the justice system. One stark result is the forensic crisis currently facing the country. In government facilities across Mexico, more than 50,000 identified bodies remain stored, while families continue to mourn and search for their loved ones. Given this reality, it is clear that the crisis of disappearances cannot be resolved solely through security strategies or military force. The experience of recent decades shows that the war on drugs has not reduced violence, nor significantly weakened criminal organizations. What it has produced instead is an expansion of violence, the territorial control of cartels, and the growth of illegal economies. Addressing this crisis, therefore, requires a change of paradigm. It requires questioning prohibitionist policies that have fueled criminal markets, while also broadening the focus toward the economic and financial actors who benefit from this system. It also requires recognizing the central role of victims and civil society organizations in building solutions. And above all, it requires breaking the cycle of systemic impunity and opening the path toward historical memory and justice. Because as long as even one person remains disappeared, Mexican society will continue to live in that suspended time that I mentioned at the beginning, a time marked by uncertainty, but also by the persistence of those who refuse to stop searching. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I would like to ask just one question, and then we can move to the audience, I think. Yeah, also, this is an opportunity for those who got cut a little short to express themselves. But yeah, thinking about this this idea of infrastructure and this infrastructure of forced disappearances, which overlaps with displacement and recruitment and slavery, and about the beneficiaries of this infrastructure, both internationally and nationally, I would like to ask if you could, sorry, I blanked out suddenly. Yeah, if you could just share more about how this infrastructure comes to just consolidate itself. What are the enablers and what are the constraints for this to persist? And yeah, I think that's it for now.
Pues cuando yo hablé un poco de infraestructura, yo estaba pensando inicialmente de forma muy concreta, ¿no?
English.
Ay, por Dios. That's funny. Yeah, I don't know what happened. But, so when I was talking about infrastructure, sorry about that. I was thinking very concretely, right, about highways and vehicles and office buildings. In this particular moment when, you know, the mid-1990s, when supposedly this wasn't happening anymore. And I think now that infrastructure has diversified and expanded like exponentially, right? Because now we're talking about what was, you know, as both Alejandra and Sibely were talking about, this is no longer just state actors, although of course state actors are still doing it too, but there's this massive expansion and diversification of people who have incorporated the practice of forced disappearance into their business, right? I really think there's a point at which people, and I've been looking at it as I mentioned in the Gulf region, like somebody realized, oh, it's just more cost effective to put the body underground. You know, I mean, I think there was at some point, especially with the Central American migrants, where people like it's cheaper, or at least that's a part of the reasoning. Obviously, then that reasoning goes way beyond that. And I was talking about this a little bit with Alejandra as well, about like the people who benefit from the terror. I remember this was like in 2014, 2015, right after the Ayotzinapa disappearances, I was speaking with Gloria Arenas, who's an insurgent who was a member of a insurgent left-wing organization in Guerrero, who was herself disappeared for 3 days, tortured, and then presented with her husband, Jacobo Silva, as political prisoners, right? And then they were in jail for 10 years and struggled and finally got out. And she was back in Orizaba, her hometown, and she was talking about how the organized crime groups had been using forced disappearance more locally. And she said to me in Spanish, "Es que ya sin terror no hay negocio." So without terror, it's not a good deal anymore. It's not good business. To make good money these days, you need to incorporate terror. Like that was her way, and I just thought it was a brilliant, very succinct description of this incorporation of tactics of terror into economies, into business strategies, right? And I think in terms of like, as you mentioned, like a very important part of this are the unseen beneficiaries. Right. I mean, it's obviously these people who are forcibly recruited, or even because I've also documented cases of just idiots, you know, who get involved and they're part of a neighborhood local gang, and the Zetas take over their hometown. So like, let's join the Zetas. And there's no other way. They're just pieces of shit, right? Because they then disappear people and like, you know, like disappear young women and force them into sexual slavery. And these are 20-year-olds who voluntarily get into this economy. But even thus, like the people who are benefiting massively, it goes way up to the high level institutions. people moving insane amounts of money. And I've always thought it's this horrid irony that, like, in Mexico, we can name all these capos, right? There's El Chapo, there's, like, going way back to Caro Quintero, like, there's this almost romance of the Mexican capo, or Pablo Escobar, right? The Colombian capo. And, like, how many gringo capos can you name? Right? And where is the real money? Right? The real money's in the United States, because as soon as the product leaps over an international border, that's where its value shoots up, right? Like a kilo of paste in Colombia or Peru is worth $1,000, right? If you get it up into New York, then you've got like grams, X number of grams that's worth $1,000. But also, I think politically, the United States benefits by administering a war on drugs, by constantly having a war on drugs at its disposal. I think, I'm sure there's scholars who've written about this in depth and would say it much better. But I think there was a transformation of the Cold War, like perpetuation of war, into the wars on terror and the war on drugs, right? I mean, the war on terror, obviously, just huge and vast, and that was the major global imperialist endeavor of the United States from the 2000s on. But the war on drugs was this kind of like bridge imperialist technique, I think, coming out of the Cold War in the 1980s, leading into the war on terror in the 2000s. There's these drug war years, which still are ongoing, but as a technology of imperialist expansion, but also local domestic social control and racialized social control. I was super devastated when I read this journalist book. A guy named Dan Baum wrote a book years ago called Smoke and Mirrors. And in the book, he quotes Robert Hadelman, who was an advisor to Nixon. And there's this one part in his documents, or in the late 1960s, he's talking about how the Nixon administration had to design a racialized form of oppression that would be disguised to look like it was something else. And so they decided to, basically wage the war on drugs. And the first thing they did was this international operation of closing the border with Mexico and kind of forcing Mexico to enter into the theater of it. There's no communist regimes for decades have been really good at effectively rooting out drug sales and consumption, right? There's this book, I saw it in your office, right? Paul Gutenberg, who writes, I think that's even a phrase of his in his introduction to that book, which is about Andean cocaine and commodity chains. But anyway, I think I probably just talked way too long. Sorry. I don't know if I got to it.
Whoever. Yeah, if you want to answer or no, go to another question. Okay. Okay. Any question from the audience? Yeah.
Hi. So first of all, thank you very much for all of the presentations. It's just been fascinating. I have a question kind of on the train of infrastructures. I was noticing that in one of the presentations, we talked about the use of digital infrastructures in the forced recruitment. And I am wondering, is there the use of that also in the infrastructure of resistance? Because in kind of the historical perspective, we talked about how the mothers were, going to the news office in person. And I'm wondering, is that still occurring today? Or are there public appeals happening on social media platforms or using kind of other different digital platforms? Thank you.
Well, I think the social movement of searching mothers and other relatives, because they are not only mothers searching, there are also families looking for their sons, their brothers, their husbands, and there is a most important movement, social movement for human rights in contemporary Mexico. So I think, as you said, it's very important to recognize the other forms of public appeal that protests in the streets, and also the whole organization that collectives have achieved at this point. And also that it is very obvious, and we had also said before that they are doing the work that the state is not doing. So we have to go deeper in how the participation of the state in this massification of absence, because it's so widespread that it is impossible to make at this point without the systematic participation of different agencies of the state. Is very impressive, and Marcela explained to us a while ago that there are a lot of agencies involved, no? Since police officers, offices of prosecutors, and it's we have to go deeper in that, and also as you said, go deeper in who is the benefits of this old system, and start to analyze this like a system, like a macro criminal networks that participates not only local or nationally, that international, because I think if we continue to study the same, we're not going to get another result, no? And I think we have to start think about new paradigms and solutions. And these solutions have to involve the organizations, social organizations, and the victims. That's it.
Well, congratulations to all of you. Y'all's English was great. I didn't have to do much. So my question is a follow-up, and I'll start with Sibely and then Alejandra. But so I'm following up with her question. Social media was the mainstream and the means to get into this recruited, the young people. We saw the emojis, we saw the hashtags. Those are traceable, right? I mean, is there something that the families can do, if not the government, to use the same medium, the social media, to appeal, to search, to find, to let the world know? I can tell you, I'm also from Sinaloa. I'm 55 years old. And I remember things, and most of the things were, well, so-and-so dijo, and then, but they say this and they say that. Rarely you saw something in the newspaper, on penalty of death for the journalists most of the time. So, but now social media allows a little bit of anonymity. So do you think that us sharing those, missing posters and missing notices, searching those hashtags, can it help? Lead to that? How can we use social media to our advantage too? For you then, Alejandra.
Yeah. I think you're right, because social media and journalists, we have seen how much important has been to the struggle and for the searching of the missed one. And so I think in this moment, society must to look for new tools and for even be innovate in the searching and looking for social justice. And then we can see very illustrative example with the recent journalist work with the Las prendas hablan. The clothes have a lot of information, so it's I think we can use more those kind of tools, and look for more creative and innovative solutions and forms of social participation.
Well, for me, it's difficult to explain or to try to think that the social media is the way the families use this. But I think that the organization in the territory is the most important, because in the only place that I see that the people can push up the cartels or the criminals is, for example, the indigenous people at Cheran or another places. Every time is more difficult because they are very encapsulados.
Encapsulated.
But if they have the organization in the territory, and if they take care of the young people, and if everyone is doing the security work, not the policeman, because they know that the police, they almost always work for the criminals, but not because they want to work. Not everyone wants to work, but imagine if you have 10, if you are a policeman and you work at Teuchitlan, and there are 500 of criminals with Israel guns. I want to talk about Israel, obviously, because I think the strategy goes to the training. I think that's something that we have to find, the training of counterinsurgency. I think for that's something for there. But in these places is the way that they can protect the territories. In the place where I live, I also see how we are not organized. And I see how about the drugs, the young people are using crystal, and they are being capturing. And this when I walk in the place where I live, I smell crystal, and the young people are doing that. I think it's more like the what are we offering to them, and why it is capturing them, and that we are not organized. In those places is where they are taking the control. And also about the technology. For example, in 2017, the authorities in that moment, they were using like mapas de calor, like infrared. And they could find the places, because in the mountains they find these places, and they use the intelligence information, the report of disappearance, and they found them. And we asked why they don't do that. The technology is there. They can liberate all the people that is alive. And if they found Mencho, but they don't find the disappeared people. That's the fucking problem. Sorry, but that's the and also USA that they help us. Thank you, Trump. Thank you to find Mencho, but we are not looking the people. They want them to die. They want them to provoke the mind. For example, in the place that they have in Teuchitlan, they first began with the oil. They control the oil, the cigarettes. They control also the tequila, the berries, and there are a lot of the huachicol that I don't know how to say. The huachicol fiscal, the huachicol. Their oil, I don't know, the huachicoleros, and they are controlling everything. I think that's the success of the capitalism. It's a new moment of the capitalism, because they have the monopoly of everything. Everything they want. They can control everything you can, and I think
and they are also linked to the formal economy. So that's the strength of that system also.
Yeah, the illegal and the legal. The people that has the benefits at Guadalajara, only at Guadalajara, they are in the like they are like the high class of society, you know. And they are not dying. Some of them, but not the majority.
think we have time for one more question. I'll do. Or 2 more questions, yeah? Or,
I guess. As you were mentioning, there's like a lot of towns where people are like they have not a lot of options but to participate. And I was wondering what's the situation within the within the collectives when there's someone whose disappeared relative was like either part of the army, like part of any of the actors that are identified as like the perpetrators. Because yeah, of course, like abrazos no balazos didn't work out, but there was like a big push for like a non-punitive response that came from this understanding that a lot of people, like the whole communities, were just like in this without them necessarily being like this evil perpetrator, right? So I don't know, in your experience, what's how do collectives react to this, or how they negotiate who can legitimately look for the disappeared relative within the movement?
Because I think my experience has been that it varies from collective to collective. I've worked with collectives in Veracruz where there are mothers of federal police officers, mothers of soldiers that are part of the collectives. The collective of Araceli and the families in Orizaba, Córdoba, and Veracruz, they have found so many perpetrators, and like they do the same protocol of identifying the remains and then setting up what they call entregas dignas, right? Which is like a kind of attempt to have a heartfelt or dignified communication with the family that their loved one has been identified. And like Araceli, her daughter was disappeared by the Zetas, and she's found bodies of Zetas, right? And she's like, goes and does the same protocol of reaching out to those families. I do think that there is, in different areas, a sense of shame and a tension between the mothers of known hitmen, right, sicarios or something like that, or oftentimes of police and soldiers as well. And there's the different tensions in Guerrero, for example. The movement around Ayotzinapa and the other disappeared was very kind of apart from the wives of the police officers of Iguala, for example, and other regions. So I think it is a source of tension, but it's different collectives deal with it differently.
well, just one more round of applause for great panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I'm sorry I'm the evil timekeeper. I just know that we will have another roundtable, and I want you to have a nice 15-minute coffee break. But do come back afterwards because we have 4 presentations. And one of them will be by also our wonderful photographer who took the picture and allowed us to use it for the conference. Thank you, Raul. So I'll see you in 15 minutes.